Welcome to the fourth episode of Conversations with the Hoff, brought to you by Liberty Crack Media. I'm your host, Steve Hoffman, and as usual, in the studio with me today is Trip Detmering, the Executive Director of Liberty Crack Media, and also Randy Oporowski, who's going to soon to be one of our podcast team.
That's right.
How's it going there, Trip?
Real good. And it's nice to have Randy in the studio. He's getting a trial by fire, so to speak. And so, nothing better than to have him on the Conversations with the Hoff.
I agree. I'm looking forward to it. If you remember in my last episode, I talked about the problems with Obamacare, and I warned that our country seemed to be on the road to socialism. Or as F.A. Hayek says, the road to serfdom. Today I'm going to talk about how our government is very busy building a welfare state on that road to serfdom. But first, you know what we got to do. It's time for Fables from the Hoff.
Way! Yay!
And today's fable is called The Hen, the Hawk, and the Helpful Shepherd. And yes, I did plagiarize this from Aesop, but then again, he's dead, so he can't sue me. Big deal. Okay, in a large green meadow lived a flock of hens who were always fussing about safety. The world is full of danger, they chucked. We need protection from everything. From the hawks, the wind, the rain, the forest, and all the other creatures that lurk beyond our meadow. One day the hawk swooped overhead. He was always hungry, but he was also very lazy. Those hens look like a lot of work, he said. If only someone would make them easier to catch. Just then, the kindly shepherd heard the hens complaining. Don't worry, little ones, he said. I'll protect you. I'll build tall fences, soft floors, padded walls, temperature controls. But you will have to abide by my rules. The hens were delighted. We don't have to think anymore. The shepherd will handle everything. Over time, the hens forgot how to spot danger. They even forgot how to fly. They forgot about all the threats that lay beyond their protected meadow. All they had to do was follow the many rules set up by the Good Shepherd. The hawk, however, loved the new rules. He now knew exactly where and when the hawks would be every minute of the day. How thoughtful for that shepherd, he said. And so, despite all the protections and following all the rules, it was now easier for the hawk to snatch a hen whenever he pleased. The hens were left wondering, what the hell happened to all that promised security? So you're probably wondering what that has to do with today's episode.
Well, I do have some questions on that. Absolutely.
Okay. The hens are in the same predicament that's happening to us. We Americans have slowly but surely given up much of our freedoms for the promise of increased security. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a timeline on how that happened. How did we become a welfare state? And it starts with the Social Security Act, and then move on to Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. And then from there, I'll talk about how it got on steroids through the implementation of the Clowerd and Piven strategies.
What was that? Clowerd and Piven?
Clowerd, not Ploward. Clowerd, yes. Clowerd and Piven. Okay, the Social Security Act passed in 1935, and it was part of FDR's New Deal. And it was sadly needed. I'll even agree. Something was needed because we had just come through the Great Depression, and Americans were suffering. The traditional aids that depended on local and family systems just weren't working. Americans had widespread unemployment, widespread poverty. So FDR had very good intentions. Very good intentions. But as we know, as libertarians, there's such a thing that's called unintended consequences.
Unintentional consequences, yeah.
And we'll get to those in the future. So the Social Security Act established a Social Security Board and a Social Security Fund. But of course, with any government program, it's got to be paid for. So how do they pay for it? Taxes. The original Social Security Act relied on basically a 2% tax that was paid half by your employer and half by you out of your wages. And also, it only applied to wages up to $3,000. Hey, that's not bad. Mm-hmm. Sounds pretty good. A government program that doesn't cost a whole lot of money. Wrong. Politicians do what politicians do. You've never seen a tax that went down. Taxes go up. The size and scope of government doesn't go down. It goes up. So today, that combined rate that's being paid by you and your employer is now 12.4%. And the wage limit, instead of $3,000, it's now $176,000.
Yeah.
And on top of that, when you look at your pay statement, you'll see a little thing for Medicare on it also. So that's added to Social Security for another 2.9%. Mm. So the total bite that's coming out of your wages is 17.3%. Think of what that money could do if it was left to the free market.
Yeah.
To create jobs, to grow the economy. But before, like I said, before 1935, care for the elderly and stuff like that was the responsibility of local and the family. And this act marked a historic shift towards government responsibility for social programs, for your welfare. Major shift. And I think that's why I say this was the beginning of the welfare state in the United States. And now we have to move on to Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. Lyndon Johnson knew a good thing when he saw it. He wanted to make sure that Democrats would always get reelected. And he knew that our population was like hens. They valued security over freedom. So he had all kind of things under his sleeve. He had a legislation enacted that covered health care, education, war on poverty, environmental and consumer protection, on and on and on and on. In 1965, you had the Medicare Act. You had the Medicaid Act. For education, you had the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Higher Education Act, the Head Start program, blah, 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 blah. And for the war on poverty, you had the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, the Food Stamp Act of 1964. And of course, we all want a clean environment, right? So in 1965, they passed the Clean Air Act and the Water Quality Act. And we want to make sure we have safe cars and safe roads. So we had the Highway Safety Act in 1966, along with the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. And of course, when we buy a product, we want to make sure that when we turn it over to look at what's in it, that the labels are accurate and honest. So we had to pass a Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. So there didn't seem to be an aspect of our life that Lyndon Johnson seemed to think that we needed some legislation for. His Great Society was the largest expansion of federal social programs since FDR's New Deal. As a libertarian, what I just said makes me sick. But it gets worse, because along comes Clowerd and Piven with a strategy to even grow the welfare state faster.
I do want to mention, I think it's Clowerd and Piven. I think they're like a spousal team when they wrote that article.
Clowerd, not Ploword. Okay.
Clowerd.
Clowerd with a C?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Clowerd.
like a spouse.
Clowerd?
Yeah, but it's a Richard Clowerd and Francis Piven.
Okay. I gotta fire my research technician. Okay, so they were both professors at the Columbia School of Social Work.
Boo.
Boo.
Social workers, not economists. What could go wrong? So their strategy was to deliberately overload the U.S. welfare system in order to trigger political and economic crisis that would force the federal government to adopt sweeping reforms. And what do we know about crisis? Never let a crisis go
to waste.
To waste,
Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Never let a crisis go to waste. So the strategy was to get all the poor and marginalized people in the country to claim all the welfare benefits that they were legally entitled to, thus overloading the welfare agencies and creating bureaucratic chaos. The target of this strategy was primarily the Democrat Party, because at the time they had the executive branch and they had the legislative branch. And Clowerd and Piven wanted them to even put in more legislation. So was this strategy successful? Well, let me tell you a story. When I turned 65 years old, well, everybody knows I'm an old fart, so many, many years ago, when I turned 65 years old, I had to make an appointment with the Social Security office to sign up for my Social Security benefits and Medicare and whatever. So I go to the appointment, I open the door to the Social Security office, and I was horrified. I was in shock. Here I am, 65 years old, and over half the people in that office were in their 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that the restroom was closed. Okay. Oh. Yeah, I see.
Well, at my age, that's definitely a concern.
Yeah, but I believe it. Yeah.
So, yes, Clowerd and Piven had a successful strategy that has definitely been implemented, and now more and more people than we ever expected are on welfare.
Mm-hmm.
Unintended consequences. It's more than just a consequence by number of people, but it has had an impact on our economy, on the fiscal health of our country. And there's an index called the debt to GDP ratio. I just want to quickly go through this to show you what a crisis we're in because of the welfare state. In 1935, the debt to GDP ratio was 39%. By 1965, it had grown slightly to 45.4%. And today, hold on to your hats. Hopefully you have your seatbelts on. Today it's 122%.
Mm-hmm.
Federal spending continues to outpace the revenues, primarily driven by the welfare state programs. If you're an economist, you know what the debt to GDP ratio signifies. And they know that if you have a ratio below 50%, your country is doing a pretty good job at managing its debt. They're fiscally responsible. They also know that if your ratio is above 77 to 90%, it's very, very risky. And that can slow economic growth, and it can limit your government's ability to respond to any real-world crisis. So what happens now? 122%. I'd like to quote from two people. The first one's Rand Paul, and the second one is Ayn Rand. Rand Paul says, as the supposed leader of the free world, it's hard to project power from a position of bankruptcy. And that's where we are. Ayn Rand also says the difference between a welfare state and a totalitarian state is just a matter of time. So in closing, I know that my last couple of podcasts have been somewhat depressing, but things will get better. You know, the helpful shepherd, our government, will take care of us.
Well, let me reverse back on a few. How, in your opinion, how unintended do you think these consequences truly are?
I'm being facetious when I say it was unintended. Clowerd and Piven knew exactly what they were doing. Their intent was to drive us into a crisis, and so that we could become a socialist paradise. And in order to become a socialist paradise, you have to destroy the current system.
Okay, so that's the intention was to get us away from a free market economy to a controlled economy in socialism, marching on to communism.
And they had to destroy that little book that we call the Constitution.
Okay, all right.
That's the intent.
I reread the article, and they used the term political crisis about a dozen times, and they said they wanted to implement a right to income and create a federal program of income redistribution. Those are verbatim quotes.
Yeah. And that is almost Marxian in intent and how they're phrasing it.
It's probably explicitly Marxist language.
Correct. I agree with that.
So in my next episode, I'm going to have some good news. I'm going to tell you about how we can make a U-turn from this road to serfdom. And my episode is going to be called Make America Free Again Agenda.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to that.
Beautiful.
That's all I have for today.
Okay.
That was a cool Ayn Rand quote.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. And I'm looking forward to next week's episode. And I hope all of our listeners will tune in and give us some feedback. Let us know how you like these topics, and make sure you tell your friends. Spread the love.